Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the life and legacy of Lloyd Hartman Elliott, 14th President of the George Washington University. Alumni and graduate student Michelle Charez will offer the opening tribute.
It is my honor to welcome you to this celebration of the life and legacy of Dr. Lloyd Hartman Elliott, 14th President of the George Washington University. Thank you, members of the Board of Trustees, university leaders, faculty and staff members, and fellow students for joining me in this very special event. I want to extend a warm welcome to the entire Elliott family, including Patricia Kaufman and Jean Elliott. It is our pleasure to welcome you as very special members of the GW family. Today, we gather to celebrate a leader whose memory is woven into the fiber of this great institution, Dr. Lloyd Hartman Elliott. I am humbled by this opportunity to represent the many students who share in respect and admiration for him. I am an Elliott School alumna, soon to be double alumna, finishing my first year in the Masters of Global Communication program. Since first walking into 1957 East Street, home of the Evelyn E. and Lloyd H. Elliott School of International Affairs almost 5 years ago, I have been inspired by the stimulating intellectual environment as well as the commitment and expertise of the faculty with whom I have had the great fortune to study. These attributes, which have likewise motivated my peers, can be directly credited to Dr. Elliott's efforts. Dr. Elliott realized the unparalleled opportunities our location in the heart of world diplomacy presented, and these facets are the legacy of his admirable work to harness this unique position. I grew up surrounded by my very large and vocal Cuban family, immersed in conversations about diplomacy, war, and most importantly, the plight of so many against repressive and cruel regimes. As I matured in my studies, I came to realize I needed to make a difference in this world. I was immediately drawn to the Elliott School because of its commitment to cultivating innovative leaders, public servants, and global citizens. The Elliott School afforded me the opportunity to study with theorists and practitioners, many of whom helped me transform rigorous academic study into rewarding professional opportunities. These experiences not only inspired me to seek a career in public service, but they helped me achieve this goal. I am proud to serve as a Charles B. Rangel State Department Graduate Fellow and look forward with great excitement to serving my country as a diplomat upon graduating in May of 2014. As a student and alumna, I am honored to have had the chance to study in such an innovative institution, and I'm grateful to Dr. Elliott for his role in shaping this school and our university into what it is today. As past, current, and future students leave the halls of our beautiful East Street home, we will always proudly carry the legacy of Dr. Elliott with us. Please join me in listening to the fond memories of Dr. Elliott's colleagues and friends. I'd like to welcome the first of these distinguished speakers, Dr. Roderick S. French.
Thank you, Michelle. It is a great privilege to join members of his family and members of his university in paying tribute to and celebrating the life and legacy of Lloyd Hartman Elliott. It is entirely fitting that we have gathered in a building constructed by President Elliott and named in honor of his long-serving predecessor. This is a perfect symbol of the continuity of leadership enjoyed by our university, with effectively only 4 presidents guiding us through nearly a century. We are grateful to each of those men, but today is dedicated to celebrating the chapter in that remarkable narrative of continuity that was written by Lloyd Elliott. The legacy of Lloyd the Builder is plain for all to see, but it is a portrait of Lloyd the Educator that I would like to sketch in broad strokes this morning. Even a partial inventory of the major buildings done under his administration attests to his overriding academic priorities. But the summary line on this dimension of his leadership is a perfectly balanced equation. 2 million square feet of revenue-producing commercial properties off campus, helping to finance 2 million square feet in academic buildings on campus. One of the most difficult and unpopular decisions made early in his presidency should have signified to anyone watching carefully that this well-dressed gentleman, who could have passed for a banker, was in fact a passionate educator. I have in mind his highly controversial decision to terminate GW's football program. That act was illustrative of his priorities as well as what he called, laughingly, his stubbornness. The football program was losing $250,000 a year when he arrived. That was, of course, a considerable sum at the time. But in the course of the sometimes contentious discussions with alumni and others, Lloyd made clear that his decision was driven by a different calculus. He told those people that even if they could come up with that kind of money and do so on a continuing basis, he would invest it not in football, but in academic programs. I, of course, was not present for those discussions, but I was present 20 years later when Lloyd asked the Board of Trustees to endorse his proposal to acquire the land for a campus in Northern Virginia. His proposal was not immediately persuasive. But in the exchange that followed, Lloyd did not defend the idea as an astute real estate acquisition, but rather as a forward-looking step in the fulfillment of GW's historical mandate. The wealth of academic programs and substantial faculty research conducted on that campus today validate his vision many times over. Now let me step back and take a broader view of his role in shaping our university. Dr. Elliott, as most people on campus referred to him, was a child of white Southern Protestant culture. But his life experiences, particularly in the Second World War, had exposed him to the realities of a much broader and more complex world. In the same way, his formative experiences as faculty member and administrator at Cornell University had grounded him solidly in the practices and policies of great American universities. It was this combination of his roots, his life experiences, and his formation as an academic administrator that equipped him uniquely to oversee the transformation of a provincial university grounded in white, Southern, Protestant, and male-dominated culture into a truly national university as envisaged by our namesake, and beyond that, into an international university capable of addressing the higher education needs of what had become the capital city of a world power. The transformation of our university involved a very carefully orchestrated mosaic of reforms. We can start with the role of women in the university. I can testify that when I joined the university in the summer of 1968, the prevailing campus culture was marked by male chauvinism, both casual and intentional. One of the first significant initiatives on this front was the Continuing Education for Women program, a very creative and highly successful attempt to re-engage working women and homemakers in formal education programs. Happily, this formulation strikes us today as strangely quaint. But in its time, CEW earned national recognition for GW as a major undertaking in correcting the gender imbalance in opportunities for higher education. A few years later, President Elliott appointed Dr. Norma Lozier as the first woman academic dean in the university. He later brought Dr. Marianne Phelps into the upper level of his administration, and we began to work with the faculty senate and deans to establish recruitment goals that would lead us to a steadily increasing number of women appointed and promoted and tenured in the faculty ranks. No doubt much work remained to be done to amplify the role of women in university life, but it was Lloyd Elliott who opened the door. And women like Lois Schwar and Marcella Brenner and Ruth Wallace and Abby Smith and Gail Hansen and Lillian Robinson made certain it was never closed again. In the same mode of reformer, it was Lloyd Elliott who took the decisive steps to reverse the stance of this university toward Black Washington and toward African Americans more generally. This was neither a passive nor a reluctant change. At one point in the very early 1970s, one of my associates in the Division of Experimental Programs, a unit which had been created by President Elliott, was a middle-aged Black Washingtonian whose dominant memory of GW when growing up was of being banned from attending musical events in Lisner Auditorium. His was not a token appointment. It was a down payment on a determined effort to diversify the university community in all of its constituencies. As if to document that fact, one of Mr. Kennedy's relatives, who joined the university a few years later, today serves as the Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusiveness. On the faculty front, the distinguished literary scholar Saunders Redding in the late 1960s, followed by the unforgettable Letitia Brown in the early 1970s, were pioneering African American appointees to the faculty. Lloyd's determination to diversify the student body was, if anything, even more concerted. He authorized the creation of an educational opportunity program in 1969. He further assigned to it one of the townhouses on G Street as a social center and a space for efforts designed to enable this new student population to achieve academic success. Literally hundreds of young men and women from that era are today proud GW alumni because of the launching pad provided by the Educational Opportunity Program. There isn't time to recite even the headings of the manifold reforms that were stimulated and supported through the Division of Experimental Programs, a unit that Lloyd created by combining two very large external grants to GW. Those funds were to be used exclusively to support innovations in pedagogy and scholarship throughout the schools and colleges of the university, and for programs that engaged both faculty and students in the life of the residential city. It is worth stressing that one clear objective of experimental programs set by Dr. Elliott was to develop courses and programs that would engage the increasingly alienated new generation of students. The aim was to ensure that in acting out their anger toward the establishment in all of its manifestations, those students would not cut themselves off from the education that could enable them to embrace reform of, rather than repudiation of, the central institutions of society. The legacy of that enterprise can be seen in continuing offerings in experiential education, residential courses, Washington area studies, environmental studies, communication studies, medical ethics, business ethics, the large family of programs in policy studies, and the panoply of legal clinics in the law school. Lloyd's modesty, in the form of being content to work behind the scenes through others, can be illustrated in one personal anecdote. Until he asked me to join him as Vice President for Academic Affairs, I don't believe that the majority of colleagues on the campus realized how much the wild and crazy things being done through the Division of Experimental Programs were in fact implementing his agenda for reform. As you might suspect, not everyone was pleased to have this fact revealed and confirmed. One senior faculty member sought an interview with the president. She said to him with great urgency, "Dr. Elliott, before you make this appointment, you should know that Rod French is a Maoist." To which, with his usual equanimity, he said, "Thank you very much for telling me this," and proceeded the next day to announce my appointment. The record requires one final major illustration of the vision of Lloyd the educator. The very first dean that he and I chose together was Mickey East in 1984 as the dean of the School of International Affairs. At that moment, 30 years ago, in spite of the presence of some outstanding individual faculty members and some quite good programs of regional studies, our school would have been seen as trailing the similar units at 3 other universities in Washington. Thanks to Dean East's splendid decade of leadership, carried forward admirably by Deans Harding and Brown, one can say this morning that on anyone's list of the outstanding schools of international affairs in the entire country, the appropriately named Elliott School of International Affairs would be among the top 5 institutions. Finally, it is necessary to mention the cardinal point of Dr. Elliott's philosophy of higher education, as that relates to an institution in the capital city of our democracy. As he put it, and I quote, "Freedom is the key, the element that must underlie the most important activities of a university. Freedom for the scholar, with no restraints from government or politics, church or tradition. Freedom in its broadest dimension can, for me, exist only in the independent institution in a free society." And so, in summary, for having understood the fragility of academic freedom in an institution situated at the very vortex of national and international power, and for all of the good things that will be so selectively chronicled this morning, tens and tens of thousands of alumni, at least 2 generations of faculty, the residential city of Washington, and the federal establishment are all greatly indebted to the 14th president of our university. Thank you, Lloyd.
I am Mickey East. In 1985, Lloyd and Rod French hired me to be dean of the then named School of Public and International Affairs. And several years later, it was my honor and privilege to become the first dean of the Elliott School of International Affairs. Lloyd made it clear at the outset that he wanted to enhance and enlarge GW's international affairs programs. At the same time, he was especially careful to leave open for us at the school the details and strategy for moving forward. He said his core philosophy was to hire good people and let them do their jobs. Lloyd's desire to grow the international affairs schools was controversial. Change is never easy in a university, but he stayed the course, compromised when needed, and never micromanaged. After the changes, the school emerged with an increased faculty due to new senior hires and faculty transfers, a larger student body after transferring in the first and second year undergrads, a clear focus on things international after transferring out the public affairs programs, and a graduate fee to augment the school's budget. Getting to know Lloyd and work with him was quite special for me. Coming from a large state university, I had virtually no opportunity to interact with the top leadership, or even a dean. Observing his leadership style was particularly valuable, and he was quite generous with his time. He had a major impact on me. That gentle man, who was also a gentleman, actually did moderate my own boisterous and loud style, believe it or not. He was quite good at running meetings. When I talked with him about this, he reminded me that there was frequently someone in the meeting who will make your point or say what you were thinking, and that it was almost always better to let someone else say it. The takeaway was, do your homework for meetings, listen, and keep things focused and on track. On a more personal level, Lloyd and Betty went out of their way to include my wife and me in gatherings and events, and they were there for me when my father died. When Lloyd stepped down as president, the University Board of Trustees indicated that they wanted to name a school in honor of Lloyd and Betty. It was such an emotional and humbling moment for us at the school upon learning that Lloyd had indicated he preferred the international school. One final anecdote that displays Lloyd's ability to remain nonplussed under virtually all circumstances. He'd invited me to join him and several other friends at the Alfalfa Club's annual dinner, where the president almost always attends. President Clinton was the guest of honor, and a good time was had by all. As the evening ended, folks were reminded to remain seated until the presidential party had departed. The minute the president left the dais, Lloyd pointed to some curtains behind us and said, "Come on, let's take a shortcut." And as we and several others stepped through the curtains, here come the president and his security detail walking directly toward us. Like a good politician, the president stuck out his hand, and Lloyd immediately shook it, identified himself as a neighbor from GW, and went about his way. A good laugh was had by all. When Lloyd retired, he was the longest-serving major university president in the nation. As you have heard, he fundamentally changed the nature of GW and built much of the foundation on which today's GW proudly rests. The Elliott School is also proud and fortunate to be part of Lloyd's legacy. Thank you.
I'm Mike Brown, the current dean of GW's Elliott School of International Affairs, following literally and figuratively in Mickey's footsteps. I have an unusual perspective on Lloyd Elliott because I met him relatively recently, 7.5 years ago, in August 2005, when I became the dean of the Elliott School. I didn't know Lloyd when he was a young man or a university president. When I met Lloyd, he was 87 years old. So I don't have a complete picture of the man. I have a snapshot of him, but it's a good snapshot, and I think it's revealing. In my first days as dean, I contacted Lloyd and Betty and asked if I could introduce myself. They invited me to lunch at the Cosmos Club, and they were exceedingly gracious. From the beginning, Lloyd was a great help to me. Just imagine, you're a new dean. You're on unfamiliar terrain. You're trying to figure out where the landmines are located. And one of your advisors is a man who has served as a university president at 2 universities for 30 years. That's a good advisor. That's not bad at all. At our first lunch, Lloyd told me the story of his arrival as president at the University of Maine. Maine being a very important institution in the state of Maine, Lloyd reached out to the congressional delegation. It was a politically astute thing to do. But he didn't reach out to them instantaneously enough, and they were a bit offended. I know it's hard to imagine members of the United States Congress being self-important and prickly, but that was the case back in the day. Lloyd's story got me thinking, and when I returned to the office, I double-checked my list to make sure that I was reaching out to all of the members of the Elliott School's constituency as quickly as possible. As I got to know Lloyd better, I came to appreciate that he was a strategic thinker, he was politically savvy, and at least with me, he was very subtle in giving advice. He never offered direct, unsolicited advice. That would have been presumptuous and insulting, and that was not Lloyd's way. Instead, he would tell a story, and he crossed his fingers and hoped that I was smart enough to figure out what the message would be. So not only did Lloyd give me advice, he actually gave me advice on how to give advice. Lloyd operated at a very high level of sophistication. Although Lloyd was much older than me and vastly more experienced than me, he treated me and everyone with respect. I think that's one of the keys to being a great mentor, and it is surely one of the signs of a good person. Lloyd was very engaged at the Elliott School, and he was the honorary chair of the school's Board of Advisors. In fact, he attended our most recent board meeting this past November. Lloyd was proud of the way the school continued to advance academically over the past 25 years, from its launch as a school devoted exclusively to international affairs under Mickey East's leadership, followed by a decade of development guided by Harry Harding. Today, the Elliott School's undergraduate and master's programs are both ranked in the top 10 in the United States. There are only a handful of universities in the top 10 in both categories. The list includes Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, Chicago, not Yale, but it's up and coming. And GW's in there, and Lloyd was very proud of that. It's a pretty exclusive club. It's a club that Lloyd felt very comfortable in. It's also quite fitting that a school that it's known for its academic excellence is named after someone who himself was committed to the highest standards of academic excellence. After Lloyd's death in January, one Elliott School board member wrote to me and said, and I quote, "Lloyd was a personal hero of mine since my college days, when his calm leadership and practical diplomacy pulled GW through some of the most turbulent weeks and months of the late 1960s. Many leaders leave behind a deep reservoir of respect and admiration, and Lloyd certainly does that. Not so many also leave behind a flowing river of affection, and Lloyd certainly does that too." End quote. Another Elliott School board member wrote, and again I quote, "Lloyd to me defined what a gentleman is. Courtly, soft-spoken, a listener who was respectful of all, and yet one who had a clear point of view that was usually the right way to go. He was literally one of the people I respected most in the world." End quote. Those of us who had the good fortune to know Lloyd recognized him as a great leader, a wise colleague, and a remarkably decent human being. At a personal level, I am grateful for the snapshot I have of him and the lessons he provided. Speaking on behalf of the faculty, staff, students, and alumni of the Elliott School, I can say that we have been and will continue to be deeply proud to be associated with Lloyd and Betty Elliott, the Elliott family, and one of the most respected names in higher education. Lloyd will be missed, but he will most certainly be remembered by all of us at the Evelyn E. and Lloyd H. Elliott School of International Affairs.
My spirit sang all day, oh my joy, nothing my tongue could say, only my joy. My heart an echo caught, oh my joy, and spake, tarry I from my thought, hide not thy joy. Joy, what beauty hast thou found? Show us thy joy. My jealousies growest, oh my joy, music from heaven is sent for our joy. She also came and heard, oh my joy, what said she is this word? What is thy joy? Is thy joy? And I replied, oh see, oh my joy, 'tis thee, I cried, 'tis thee, thou art my joy.
Hello, my name is Jerry Barron, and I'm a member of the law school faculty, and I was dean of the law school during Lloyd's administration. I want to say to the members of the Elliott family that during my deanship, Myra and I spent a great deal of time with Lloyd and Betty, and we treasure the many occasions we spent with them and our friendship with them. When I said I was dean of the law school during his administration, that does not quite do justice to his role in me becoming a dean. We had had a failed dean search, and I had been the chairman of the dean search committee. It was not a put-up job. And so Lloyd and I were talking about what to do, and he said, well, I have a candidate. And I said, who? And he said, you. And that's how it happened. But I first encountered Lloyd Elliott when I joined the full-time faculty in 1965. 1965 was exactly the year that Lloyd Elliott assumed the presidency of this university. I therefore had an opportunity to watch him in operation long before I worked with him. I first saw him when he and some other administrators walked past my office in a wretched building which was called Bacon Hall, which is now Lerner Hall, one of the chief teaching facility of the law school. And this was when I was a very junior associate professor. Lloyd was making a tour of the law school, or the National Law Center, as it was then called. It was a memorable visit, and immediately it showed his quality as an administrator. At that time, the law center was divided into two faculties: the law school faculty and the graduate school of public law faculty. The responsibility of the law school faculty was the education of the JD students, and the responsibility of the faculty of the graduate school of public law was the education of LLM students. In the opinion of many, at that time, this administrative structure created serious problems, such as duplication of administrative services and unnecessary jurisdictional issues and disputes. Dr. Elliott worked with the affected administrators and faculty. Shortly after that visit, the two faculties were united into a single faculty and administrative structure. Once it was done, its wisdom became immediately apparent. That was Lloyd's way: to work with the faculty, to effect change when it needed to be made, and to do it quickly and quietly. This, I came to realize, was characteristic of Lloyd Elliott. As I think of the university and the law school as it was then, and I compare to what they both are now, the difference is truly remarkable. In 1965, there was no Gelman Library, no Burns Law Library, no Smith Center, no Marvin Center. These campus institutions were all constructed during the administration of Lloyd Elliott. But he wasn't just a builder of this institution. He was a leader possessed of subtlety and charm. He had a good understanding of human nature. When I became dean in 1979, he offered me some advice. He said, "You will not be able to do everything that needs to be done. What you should do is identify those things you are good at and do those, and delegate the rest to others." It was good counsel. I think I should say a word about the remarkable effect that Lloyd's very presence had on people. I remember a difficult meeting at a faculty retreat. There were some at the meeting who were, to understate, displeased with some administration decisions. Lloyd came to the meeting. He listened to the criticisms that were made. He then told why he had taken the actions that he had. He did this with courtesy and understatement. He simply stated his position and the reasons for it. He spoke quietly, forcefully, and effectively, and his essential modesty and honesty was evident. It was a successful meeting. I worked with Lloyd Elliott for many years. I found him to be an accessible and thoughtful man with some strong beliefs. His vision of the university presidency was built around a few core concerns. As your program indicates, a primary concern was to protect the integrity of the university and the life of the university. For example, he was always determined not to allow the university to be used for purposes that he thought were not appropriate for a university. Located in Washington as we were often sought after as a venue. I am sure it is no different today. Lloyd sometimes turned aside these venue requests. On one such occasion, a request came to him when I happened to be in a meeting. He denied the request. Considering the importance and the status of the requester, it was a brave denial. In explaining his decision to me, I was struck by how he described George Washington University. He referred to this university as follows: "This freestanding, private, independent, non-sectarian university." For him, there was no more honorable description of this university than that. Lloyd Elliott believed that you hired good people, and then, as Mickey said, you let them run with the ball. He was not a micromanager. If you needed advice, he was there to provide it, but he wanted his deans to take responsibility. He thought that if you were leading a school or department of a university and you had a tough decision to make, you shouldn't expect him to make it for you. One of his firm beliefs was that an academic leader should take responsibility. However, once you made a decision, if he trusted you, he was your supporter, and he made sure the whole university knew it. It was my honor that I had his trust. It was my great joy to work with him for many eventful and happy years. He was a great leader and a great man.
You will know by the brevity of my remarks that I am not an academic. I first met Lloyd as the member of a bank board in the city, and so my perspective is a little bit different. Not being an educator, I viewed Lloyd as a participant in the business part of our city, the commercial aspects of what made Washington run. And on the outside, before becoming an insider, if you will, I gained a respect for the kind of person he was then. As questions were deliberated, he had a quiet, positive manner in which he approached things, diffident but sure. And so it was my pleasure to know him before I knew him on campus. Although it's been said differently, Lloyd could be very direct. When I first joined the Board of Trustees, he welcomed me by saying, "I know why you're here. You men in business are always trying to improve your resume by associating with a place of higher learning." What Lloyd did not know was that years earlier, I had enrolled in an urban studies program led by Dean Archie Woodruff of the School of Business and International Affairs, who had for some time attempted to enhance my education and even improve my resume. Washington at that time, of course, was a different city, and for GW, comparing its endowment with the endowments of other major institutions, it was small. And so the first major effort to improve on the size of the endowment was something that Lloyd and I worked closely together on. We worked as a team to launch the first major campaign the university had ever mounted to build its endowment. And to do that, we made house calls, if you will, on business leaders in the community at a time when the city was still recovering from the trauma of the late 60s, where we experienced extreme civil unrest, and the effect of that lasted for more than a decade. So people were not always delighted to welcome fundraisers. One house call stands out in my mind because for me it defined Lloyd. The party we called upon was surrounded by staff as we were led to the two chairs immediately in front of the opposing desk where we were invited to sit, like two schoolboys on trial for a misdemeanor. After Lloyd patiently and carefully described the reason for the need, the prospect declared, "You are the second-rate president of a second-rate university, and I will give you nothing. Our gifts go to Harvard." Lloyd remained silent as I offered a modest rebuttal, and then we quietly departed. It was a long elevator ride to the ground below. When we reached the sidewalk, Lloyd turned to me with that famous twinkle in his eye and with a slight smile on his face said, "I don't think they're going to give." That was his only comment. I knew then that the university's first major capital campaign would succeed, and it did. As a postscript, my wife and I, believe it or not, have university-age children. And a little over a year ago, we were touring campuses and went to Harvard, among others, and could not gain admission to the library. GW's libraries are open. Lloyd had a marvelous sense of purpose, an unflappable manner, and an irresistible sense of humor. I am honored to be with you celebrating the remarkable accomplishments of this man from West Virginia. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're invited to stand and join the chamber choir in singing the George Washington University's alma mater.
I'm known around these parts as Skip Ganeem. I was heading home to Georgia for the summer. It was May 1965. I'd been president of the student body for about 4 months, but they had been a very tumultuous 4 months. GW was really adrift. We hadn't had a president, actually no leadership, I believe for about 3 years due to the death of Lloyd's predecessor. Students were really a boil, promises and all of them unfilled. As Berkeley was erupting on the West Coast, distinguished leaders like myself gathered together and decided we would address our grievances to the Board of Trustees. And to be more effective, we threatened them. That things out there might just come here. Well, we didn't really say it that way, but they got the message. Now, at least several of the trustees agreed to meet with us. But as I left that summer to go home, I had no idea what was going to happen when my colleagues came back in the fall. It was August. I received a phone call from the university saying that they needed me to come back to Washington for a meeting. And they left me, perhaps desiring to do so, with thinking that it had something to do with my activities that previous spring. I was taken to the Washington Hotel, up to a room where I was introduced to a Dr. Lloyd Elliott. That was 48 years ago. In his very quiet, calming voice, he told me that he'd been offered the position of president of George Washington University, but that he told the committee he wouldn't accept it until he'd had an opportunity to talk with student leaders, hence this meeting. He wanted to know if I thought he should accept the offer. He asked if the students would welcome him. Well, I demurred. I said that, Dr. Elliott, that really depends on what kind of president you intend to be. He spent a number of hours explaining to me his approach in managing and leading a university. He talked about his vision of a community in which all parties, including students, were collectively engaged in building a strong and a vibrant educational institution. I thanked him for sharing his vision and his candid thoughts about GW's potential, and I observed to him that I hadn't seen that kind of openness or inclusiveness since I had come to GW. I moved to excuse myself, thanking him, and he said, wait. Wait. You haven't answered my question. Should I accept this offer, and will the students welcome me? Honestly, I really didn't feel it was my place to give him that advice, but I did say to him, look, if you lead as you said you would, and you're inclusive in building a community spirit, you'll have our total support. Well, he became President Elliott. He led the university just as he said he would. His vision became the university community's vision. With patience and great perseverance, he brought people together. He activated a moribund plan to develop university infrastructure. He was determined to make GW a premier university, and I think he succeeded. But President Elliott, he became Lloyd to me in subsequent years. He followed me throughout my career. Virtually every time the Foreign Service brought me back through Washington, he was there. He was an encourager. He was a supporter. He was keenly interested in what I was doing, what was happening in the world. When I returned to GW in 2004, I think it was for Lloyd a proud moment. He had always said he hoped I would come back to GW. And I was proud in a way I think that you can only understand, knowing how our relationship began back in 1965. I was proud that I was coming back to a school that was named after Lloyd and his beloved wife, Betty. And he was still encouraging and supporting as much to me in the last few years as he ever was throughout my whole life. In all these past few years, Lloyd and Betty, while she was still alive, never missed one of my Kuwait lectures, and I have one Thursday night. It will be the first time. And every year they sat right in the front row, nodding, moving their heads, and every now and then a quizzical look about something I said, which I knew I'd hear about later in the evening. But they were always there. Lloyd and Betty loved this university, and they were particularly touched when the Elliott School of International Affairs was named after them. Both of them knew how important it was, how important it is, that we produce talented and knowledgeable graduates to work in a field so vital for our nation's security. They saw, while they were both still alive, the success of the Elliott School in meeting that responsibility. Dr. Elliott, President Elliott, Lloyd, forgive me for talking so long about a man I so much admire and loved, a gentle yet determined soul who cared about people and cared about this university deeply. Lloyd, I can see Betty using that little signal that says it's time to sit down. So I will, but not before I say once again, thank you, Lord, for being my president, my encourager, and my friend. You will forever be in our hearts. I am pleased to be able to introduce the 16th president of the George Washington University. Help me to welcome Dr. Stephen Knapp.
Thank you, Ambassador Kaneem. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia, Jean, members of the extended Elliott family, please know you have our deepest condolences, and we're honored you could join us today. Members of the George Washington University Board of Trustees, current and emeriti, members of the faculty, current and emeriti, administrators, alumni, students, and friends. I want to thank you all for gathering here in memory of President Elliott, and let me thank our previous speakers for their very moving and informative tributes to the importance of Lloyd and Betty Elliott among us. I'd also like to thank the Chamber Choir for so beautifully performing some of Lloyd Elliott's favorite music. Wonderful performance this morning. And I'd especially like to acknowledge my predecessor and Lloyd's immediate successor, President Emeritus Stephen Trachtenberg, right here, Stephen Joel Trachtenberg. I met Lloyd Elliott early in my tenure, and I was struck not only by the grace with which he welcomed his newest successor, but also by the depth of his ongoing interest in GW, despite his having retired 2 decades earlier. Lloyd Elliott was the epitome of what any of us would want in a university president, a man who was intensely loyal to GW, but who was always direct and dispassionate about the challenges and opportunities the university faced, and who had the courage to lead as well as the humility to listen, and whose ambitions were focused not on his personal achievements so much as on what could be achieved by others, namely the scholars, students, and alumni whom he led by example and whom he supported by creating the academic and physical environment in which their talents could fully flourish. To see how effectively he accomplished that presidential mission, we need only look around us, and you've heard a lot about this already. Every day we use the Cloyd Heck Marvin Center for countless activities and events. We cheer on our student athletes at the Charles E. Smith Center. Our faculty teaches in the Academic Center, Norma Lee and Morton Funger Hall, Theodore M. Lerner Hall, and Walter G. Ross Hall. Every one of those buildings was constructed during his presidency. And then there are the libraries, the Estelle and Melvin Gelman Library, the Jacob Burns Law Library, and the Paul Himmelfarb Health Sciences Library, once again, all built during Lloyd Elliott's tenure as our president. But what Dr. Elliott built here was more than a matter of bricks and mortar. He also laid the financial foundations for the university's rapidly ascending academic stature. When he arrived, there were only 3 endowed professorships. By the time he retired, there were 20. GW's endowment grew from $8 million to more than $200 million. In later years, he created the Equal Opportunity Program and established the rank of university professor. In short, as I wrote immediately after learning of his passing, his visionary leadership set the George Washington University on course to become the world-class institution of higher learning it is today, and we will honor his legacy by pursuing that course into the university's 3rd century. 48 years ago, in his home state of West Virginia, the Charleston Gazette published an article that began, "Dr. Lloyd H. Elliott, a Clay County farmer boy, has been named president of the George Washington University in Washington, D.C." Clay County farm boy. We should all reflect on that simple fact. After graduating from a local college at only 18 years of age, he began his career as a high school teacher in one of the poorest counties in our nation, in the coal country of Appalachia. From there to the University of West Virginia, to the command of a U.S. Navy landing craft during the Second World War, to the University of Colorado, to Cornell University, to the University of Maine, and finally to a city that was just coming into its own as the capital not just of this nation, but of the world. And there he helped to build what, thanks in many ways to his efforts, would become that city's largest and most powerful university. An extraordinary journey, and we are fortunate to have had this morning a few moments together to reflect on where that journey took Lloyd Elliott and where the results of that journey have taken us. And now I'd like to read from a proclamation issued by Mayor Gray in memory of Dr. Lloyd Hartman Elliott, Mayor Gray himself, an alumnus of that era of the university. Whereas Dr. Lloyd Hartman Elliott served as the 14th president of the George Washington University for 23 years with vision, honor, and foresight, and whereas Dr. Elliott's dedication and commitment to the students, faculty, and community members pushed GWU to the forefront of research, innovation, and development, and whereas Dr. Elliott's vision for the future of GWU led to the construction of the Cloyd Heck Marvin Center, the Charles E. Smith Center, the Academic Center, Norma Lee and Morgan Funger Hall, Theodore Lerner Hall, and Walter G. Ross Hall, and whereas the progress made by Dr. Elliott's administration extended beyond construction projects and included the creation of the Educational Opportunity Program, the growth of the university's endowment, an increase in the number of endowed professorships, whereas in recognition of Dr. Elliott's accomplishments as an educator, administrator, and his commitment to the study of world affairs, the School of International Affairs was renamed in his honor. Now, therefore, I, the Mayor of the District of Columbia, do hereupon call upon all residents of this great city to join me in remembering Dr. Lloyd Hartman Elliott for his contributions to the George Washington University and to this community. I would now like to ask Patricia Elliott Kaufman and Jean Elliott to join me at the podium. And on behalf of the Board of Trustees, if you could come up. We have the resolution from Mayor Gray that I just read will be displayed at the reception, but I'd like to present to you this resolution unanimously passed by the university's Board of Trustees in memory of your father. Thank you very much for being with us. And, please accept our heartfelt thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our celebration of the life and legacy of Dr. Lloyd Elliott. Please join us for a reception in the Great Hall. Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please remain seated as the Elliott family and today's speakers depart for the reception in the Great Hall. Thank you.